Hello, I'm Anavoltus, and this is my stand comparison matrix that I made for Stardust Crusaders. Now, I'm actually going to expand this even more so that I can include the other parts as well. But I decided to start with Stardust Crusaders since that's the first part that has stands in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And let's actually see if we can zoom out here a bit. So there we go. So we have it all in frame. So I decided on this, compared to the previous video, that I would actually merge Star Platinum and the World, since I was giving them the same comparisons with everything else. It made sense for me to merge them since they essentially have a controversially, this might be a controversial statement, that they have the same ability. Um, I know that there's a difference in the official stand stats, and I know that there's also an observed difference in how well they're used, but I think a lot of that also has to do with the qualities of the stand user. For example, Dio was a vampire, which allowed him to have different limitations to Jotaro. But anyway, of course, the most powerful stands on here. We've got Star Platinum, which, in my opinion, in its or the world, in its final time stop ability, it also has great speed, accuracy, strength as well. Even though it's not the longest range stand, in my opinion, Star Platinum or the world could beat any other stand in Part 3. I don't think that anyone would really debate me on that, since Time Stop is the really an overpowered ability, and it's supposed to be overpowered because Araki tries to make his villains overpowered. Now, Cream, on the other hand, could beat almost every stand. And again, when I'm talking about whether a stand could beat another stand, what I'm specifically referring to is which stand is more likely to win, in my opinion, than the other stand. For example, Knum uh, is a stand that allows the user to alter his appearance, which means that stands that have to be used to target a particular user, or stands that don't really have any offensive capabilities, will put the user of such stands at a disadvantage against the user of Knum, because the user of Knum can simply ambush over and over again by his ability to change appearance, which is not possible with most other stands. Um, However, with a stand like Tenor Sax, you can essentially manipulate a larger area, which is a hard counter to Hanged Man, number 13 on here, which, of course, because then you can change whether or not there are reflective surfaces by changing the surroundings to a large extent. So stands that may seem like they are relatively weak and have no offensive capabilities can actually have uh, simply large strategic advantages, depending on which other stands you're going against. So that's my idea on this. And another one, Ebony Devil. I mentioned this in the other video, but Ebony Devil, because it requires the user to put himself at risk, it is, in my opinion, always giving the user a strategic disadvantage, even against other stands like, let's say, Empress, which isn't the most powerful stand, but at least the user doesn't have to give away his plan of attack by putting his own life at risk. Because if the user of Ebony Devil is crippled, knocked out, or killed, then suddenly any advantage that Ebony Devil as a stand has is removed. And another thing I'd like to point out is that the way that I set this up, uh, when I did these calculations as to which stand would be better, I tried to stick to the way the stands are used in the story. So, for example, Ebony Devil as a stand has a sword. However, we never see it being used, and there's no reference that it could be used. So I'm going to assume that the user of Ebony Devil, hypothetically, would always be a user that would not attack using the stand directly, since we've never seen the stand be used to attack directly. And this also ties into the idea that the type of stand that a person develops is based upon that person, since it's essentially an extension of their fighting spirit. For example, let me see a particular example that this really follows. Uh, a huge example would be Osiris, or Osiris is a stand that is based on the actual profession of the stand user, and therefore it is very convenient and useful to that user, because as a stand it is strongly linked with that user's personality. So I think that we can generally say that even if we assume that in our scenarios that the stand user is more competent than the stand user that appears in the story, even if we assume that, we would still assume that since the personality is somewhat similar, that the stand would in theory be used in a similar way. But there you go. That's just my opinion on that. Please tell me what you think on this. If there's any particular matchup that you would like me to elaborate on, or that you disagree with, I would be happy to hear about it. If you want me to go more in detail and make another one that is more in particular as to a stand ambushing another particular stand, then I can do that, because this is somewhat based on the idea of an ambush, but also based on the idea of a straight up fight. So I tried to take multiple types of situation into account for this, which is why stands that are very useful for an ambush, such as Death 13, don't really rate very highly. Because while in theory, with Death 13, you could simply lock somebody out of using their stand and ambush them and kill the person without the person being able to defend himself. The problem with Death 13 is that if your opponent knows about your stand ability, your stand becomes practically useless. Or if your opponent knows your identity and is coming after you, then your stand also becomes significantly less useful, because your opponent may be able to hunt you down before having to take a rest, which is what Death 13 relies upon. So that's some info on there. And then there's stands that may not seem very powerful, but that are significantly more powerful, such as Dark Blue Moon, which is shown to be able to have the capabilities of a close range combat stand that is significantly stronger in the water, however, still would have some capabilities on land, and still would therefore have some basic advantages over other particular stands that are just generally weak to close range combat stands, because Dark Blue Moon is shown to be used on the deck of the ship. So it's not as if it's a purely aquatic stand, it's just that, generally speaking, it is primarily an aquatic stand. And another, and how it would match up against other close range combat stands outside of water, is how I decided that was based upon the stand stats that Araki gave it. So this list is not purely based on stand stats, because the way stands work, there are stands that hard counter other stands in their abilities. Um, and I also take situations into account as to which stands were used, as well as how they were used. But when I am confused in a more direct matchup with stands that have abilities that don't counter each other, I then look at the stand stats to get Araki's opinion as to which stand would, in theory, be the more powerful stand. Which is why Wheel of Fortune is on here actually relatively good, because it actually has a good amount of durability on it. But anyway, I think that that's all that I'll really be talking about here, unless someone wants me to talk about any particular matchup. But this is, uh, I'm going to use this to aggregate a score as to how powerful the stands are compared to each other. And if people would like, I will make a tier list that takes this chart into account, so that we then have an actual tier list that's based on numerical data, um, based on this analysis. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awultus over and out.